All right, John.
All right.
Thank you. All right.
So this is special for me because if I look back just 7 or so years ago when Lyft started, I looked up to and still look up to Ben Horowitz. So being here
Appreciate that. Thank
is super special. And we started working together at the height of the cultural question.
Yeah.
I think
Well, in the bad old days,
Yes.
things were very rough. Yeah.
It was pretty wild. We were a few years into our time with Lyft, and most people thought at the time that we asked Ben to join our board, most people thought Lyft was going to fail, that Lyft was going to be crushed.
Yeah. When he says most, it's like almost everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I remember. But in 2017, we started seeing signs of our competitors' cultural problems. And so why did you join our board?
Yeah. So I, of course, joined right before that, or not long before that. But I would say the reason that I joined we'll get into the competitors' cultural problems, but didn't have to do with that so much. So, you guys were under tremendous pressure. So much pressure, it's funny. When Lyft went public and Andrew Ross Sorkin interviewed me, the thing he said to me before the interview was, Ben, I never thought these guys were going to make it. I can't even believe we're here. Like, this is crazy. So that's how much people doubted it. But, when I went to see you, I was like, well, these guys have to be under, like, amazing amount of pressure. And I had been through that kind of pressure, so I knew what it felt like. And when I went to see you, and I could tell how much pressure you were under, and you hit it like a little better than Logan. Logan already speaks slowly, and it was like he could barely even breathe, and it was just like that whole feeling, and I knew that feeling. But the thing that impressed me so much was how you guys were committed to we're going to die on this one. There is no way we are backing off or not going to try and build this company. We're going to we have no breath, nothing. We're hanging on by our fingernails. We're going to get the money. We're going to keep building the company. We're going to go. And, having seen a lot of people in trouble, but nobody is in bad trouble as you were, and seeing that attitude, that really made me want to kind of join the board. So when you asked me, I was actually excited to do it because I was like, okay, I know what this is. I want to be on this team. But with Uber, it was, if it had just been a bad culture, we would have had a much easier time with it. But it was kind of partly a really good and powerful culture and partly a very bad culture. And so, if you looked at, and I think, you and I'll say it out loud because you probably can't, but we're kind of glad that Travis is not CEO because he did do some certain things very well. And if you look at the original definition of the Uber culture, it was really well defined. And there's even a book by Mike Isaac, with one of the things, Super Pumped. And these are cultural values, always be hustling, toe stomping, or whatever that he had in there. So he had built this culture and trained people on it and got them to follow it. And they really did, but it was kind of characterized most specifically by competitiveness. They wanted to crush competition more than anything. That was what drove the whole company and so forth. And the thing that made the culture, at least in my view, go bad was they didn't say how far was too far. There was no ethical, legal, any kind of line. And so if somebody felt like they were doing something that was improving their competitiveness, they would just do it. And, we all learned about that when Susan Fowler wrote the blog post, which basically, she goes to work at Uber, and first day on the job, her manager sexually harasses her in writing, in a chat. So, very obvious. So she, takes a screenshot of it, sends it to HR, and the HR person says, well, he's a high performer, so you can transfer. And anybody who's run anything knows, well, that's so illegal. you have to, if somebody makes a claim, you have to investigate it regardless. And if they and if they have the screenshot of it, like that's a very credible claim. So what would cause a person to do that? And it really is the culture of competitiveness was so strong, and the complete silence on, anything else or anything as far as like ethical or what the limit was. And that, if you look at all the transgressions that they had, they were all of that nature, be it Anthony Lewandowski and stealing the Google IP, or getting the medical records of the woman in India, or what do they call it, Project Hell, when they hacked our app. So like the whole thing was just, in order to compete, we're going to do whatever it takes. And there is no limit. And that was the thing that kind of eventually unwound them. But thankfully, that was good. But it would have been easier if they were just like a bunch of idiots with a bad culture. They had a kind of somewhat, like they had part of a great culture and then a fatal flaw.
So a lot of people use the word culture. Why did you think it was so important to dedicate a book to writing about business culture?
And a lot of this came from my experience as CEO. So when I started as CEO, I asked the kind of CEOs that I looked up to, okay, how do I become like really good at this job? And they said, well, pay attention to the culture, Ben. And I was like, okay, great. How do I do that? And that's basically, it was like about, Scooby-Doo, right? So I kind of didn't really know how to do it, and I knew, like, I could kind of sense that it was going bad and so forth, and it was really confusing to me. And as I got into it, I realized it's a very difficult but important thing in that you have an organization, you've got a mission statement, you have all the management techniques, you have KPIs, OKRs, whatever you're using, goals and objectives. But none of that is really what the culture is, and none of that really drives the real kind of day-to-day behaviors that define you. Like, do you return that phone call like immediately, tomorrow, next week, never? Do you show up at the meeting on time? Are you late? Do you go home at 5 o'clock? Do you go home at 8 o'clock? Do you stay at the Four Seasons? Do you stay at the Red Roof Inn? Like, all these things are your culture, but there's not really, they're not defined anyway. So how do they get, like, how does that behavior go? And anybody who's worked in a company knows you're either this way or you're that way, or you're on time or you're not, you're never on time, or you're always on time, or whatever it is. Those are all these cultural elements. And the kind of advice that you get when you're CEO is all wrong on it, because it's like, oh, well, what you do is you go and you have an offsite, and then you kind of have everybody say what they think the cultural values are, and then you put them on like a nice, plaque. And then but we're really going to operationalize it here. We're going to put it in people's performance review. Well, you don't even know if they got the phone call. How do you know if they returned the phone call? Like, what are you talking about, performance review? You don't know that then. And so how do you move the culture? How do you influence a culture? How do you shape a culture? That became, I thought, important enough to write the book. But then, as I got into it more, the thing that I realized is that is what your company is. And I love the quote from The Way of the Samurai that I use in the book, which is like, a culture is not a set of beliefs. It's a set of actions, which is why I call the book, What You Do Is Who You Are. It's not what you believe. It's not what you think. It's not what you tweet. It's what you do. It's not the values that you have. That's not who you are. Who you are is what you do. And in the samurai, they call them virtues, because it's the behaviors. The behaviors are the culture, not the values. And that's why when people have 20 values, I'm like, well, how many of those behaviors do you have? Like, none. So your culture is hypocrisy. And so the book is really about, like, how do you get that behavior?
Yep. And then in the book, you introduce 4 distinct leaders to illustrate different examples of how culture can be affected. What drew you to those 4 stories?
Yeah, so they're all different. So I'll take the first one, which is the story of Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. And the reason I picked the Haitian Revolution, and actually I'll bring it back to Uber, because I compare it to what Toussaint did to what Travis did, and what Dara did, actually, interestingly. but the Haitian Revolution is remarkable because it's the only successful slave revolt in human history. So the only slave revolt that ever resulted in an independent state. And you think about it, like the history of slavery in humanity is very, very long. It goes back beyond the Bible days. And you have to wonder, well, why has there only been one successful slave revolt? Certainly people were motivated. If you're going to fight for anything, you would fight for freedom. But why did only one work? And when you get into the details, it really turns out that slavery is super destructive to culture, particularly in the military sense, in that, a lot of culture is based on, what kind of behaviors do you want over, you need a long-term view of the world in order kind of for culture to matter. And in particular, one element of culture that's really central to military culture is trust. And that's really hard in slave culture because trust is a long-term idea, and that I'm going to do something for you today because I trust that in the future, sometime in the future, like it will come back to me. But if you're a slave, there's no what are you going to do tomorrow? You don't own tomorrow. You don't own your life. Like your family can be removed tomorrow. You can be killed tomorrow. You don't dictate what you do. And so it's hard to take that long. It's hard to get from that to a military culture where if you don't trust the order, then you have chaos. So you have to have trust in that. And so Toussaint had this problem of how do I go from slave culture to military culture? And the story is remarkable. I won't go through the whole thing because it's a whole book, but he uses a variety of different techniques to kind of move to this military culture. And what he achieved was amazing. So he not only defeated the Spanish army, the British army, and this is the British army at the height of the British Empire, so they were most powerful, and Napoleon. And Napoleon wanted him gone super bad. He hated Toussaint. And one of the things that he did was around this idea of ethics. So just in the same way Travis ignored ethics, Toussaint went the exact opposite way. So when you think about the Haiti at that time, it was basically the greatest sugar colony in the world. And that's why the British and the Spanish and the French were all fighting for it. They all wanted the sugar. And so it's the most mercenary war environment you can imagine because they're literally fighting over sugar. And raping, pillaging, the whole thing. And Toussaint has a slave army. And he makes this rule, no pillaging. The reason he says is you can't pillage because we're fighting for liberty. They're fighting for sugar, we're fighting for liberty, and you can't get liberty if you're taking people's liberty. So very, very clear, connected the culture to the mission, to the whole thing. But the stories are basically the Spanish go in and they light the plantations on fire, they kill all the animals, they rape the women, they steal everything, and then the slave army goes in, and these guys are starving, they're half naked, they don't even have clothes, and they touch nothing, and there's no violence. And the knock-on effect of that culture was Toussaint got the support of the locals in Haiti, the white people, particularly the white women, who referred to him as father. This is a slave running a revolt on a colony, getting that kind of accomplishment. And you put that all together and you compare that to, then you go back to Uber where, he just silent on ethics, lost the support of everybody. Then his replacement comes in and what does he say? Well, our thing is just do the right thing, period. Well, what the hell does that mean? Nobody even knows what that means. What's the right thing? Because, if you go back to the Haitian Revolution, kind of the right thing being pillaging, so you can pay these guys so they can win the revolt and so they can free the slaves? Wouldn't that potentially be the right thing? You got to say what the right thing is. You have to be explicit. You have to create the meaning behind the ethics. And so this is a long answer to the beginning of your question, but I think it's very difficult for people to see culture when it's their culture. So if you're in Silicon Valley, showing up to an interview on time or combing your hair for it or whatever, that you just kind of do that. You don't think of that as a cultural thing, but it is a cultural thing. But when you look at it through the lens of the ancient samurai or the Haitian Revolution or prison or Genghis Khan, then you see the culture and you can see what he did. And so that's why I thought those examples would work.
You just mentioned combing your hair and things like that. What's the importance of first impressions in terms of bringing people into a new culture?
Yeah, so this is a great example of why I use the examples. So I tell CEOs all the time, I'm like you got to take new employee orientation seriously. You have to take integration seriously. You have to take onboarding seriously. And I go through that, and I always, and people rarely listen to me on that. So I've been doing this for years. So the way I told in the book, rather than go through like, okay, this person gets hired and this is what happens if you don't train them, I tell the story through the eyes of Shaka Senghor. So Shaka Senghor went to prison when he was 19 years old for a murder that he did commit in a sense to 19 years to life. So his first day in prison, very first day, he's in the rec area. And a prisoner walks up to another prisoner and stabs him in the neck. And then he pulls the shank out. The prisoner bleeds to death and dies. He throws the shank in the garbage and goes to the cafeteria and has a sandwich. And Chuck is telling me this story, and he said, we see that. We're all looking at us like, where the hell are we at? And then I had to ask myself, could I do that? And I said, wait a minute, Shaka. You did that. You were in for murder. Like, what are you talking about? Could you do that? He said, no. I didn't do that. He said, what I did was first of all, I'd been shot like 18 months earlier. I had PTSD. I was paranoid all the time. I'm in a drug deal. A guy's coming. There's two guys in the car. One guy I knew who was supposed to be there. Another guy I didn't know who wasn't supposed to be there. And the guy I don't know is supposed to stay in the car. And he gets out of the car and starts coming at me. And I have a gun in my pocket. I react. I shoot him. That's what I did. He said, what this guy did is he spent weeks taking a 2-liter bottle and filing it into a weapon. Then he decided, am I going to stab this guy in the stomach and wound him? Or am I going to stab him in the neck and kill him? And then he stabs him in the neck, throws it in the trash, keeps it moving to the chow hall, and has a sandwich. I couldn't do that. But I knew that if I was going to survive here, that's what I would have to learn how to do. And that's new employee orientation. That's how you get oriented into a culture. And so, I have CEOs, they're like, you think those values on the wall are what going to cause people's behavior? No, it's when they come in and they say, oh, that's the guy who's got the big title and the big salary, and he just took credit for her work. Oh, that's what you have to do to succeed here. That's your culture. That's what you're going to get. And so if you don't know what that experience is, what it looks like walking into your company, when people look at who's successful and look at the behaviors and decide how they're going to behave to succeed, then you're not doing it. And so, first impressions matter a ton. And anybody who's ever gone to a job, you're paying such incredible attention that first week, you want to understand how every single thing in that organization works. And good or bad, on the wall or not on the wall, that's what you're going to do. And so it's really, really, really important to think these things through. And I wish people who ran the prison system would think about these things, because that's how you get, how do you get so violent in prison? Well, that's how you get so violent.
Slight change of topic. When I moved out here from the East Coast, something that struck me is how much Silicon Valley values the idea. The culture here is around breakthrough ideas. Yeah. What's your idea? What are you doing to change the world? Why do you think that's true?
Well, I think, look, it's kind of the thing about innovation, and it's a little bit why big companies have such a hard time with innovation. So an innovative idea, by definition, sounds like a bad idea at the time. And so, if you think about my job in venture capital, we always say, we're in the business of looking for bad ideas, good ideas that look like bad ideas. And the reason it's if everybody thought it was a good idea, then it wouldn't be innovative. And so so like a thing that we want fun might be a longer life battery in a cell phone, because that's like obviously a good idea, which means like Apple and Samsung and big companies are going to be working on it. So it's not like a breakthrough. It's like everybody knows that you need a longer battery for your phone, but that's not like the breakthrough idea. So we fund our things that seem like, but now the problem with bad ideas or things that look like bad ideas is the other thing that looks like bad idea is a bad idea. And so big companies are really good at prioritizing their ideas so that they do the best ideas first, and then, and then they get rid of the bad ideas. But the problem with getting rid of the bad ideas is that's where like the innovative ideas are. And so how do you deal with that? And so a lot of, what Silicon Valley is about is, well, why is this bad idea a good idea? And what is the secret behind it? And so if you take, take Lyft, for example. Okay, like I'm going to drive around, I'm going to pick up strangers in my car. They're going to pay me some money. And I think in the early days, they weren't even paying me when it's like a tip or whatever.
And you put a pink mustache on the car.
Yeah, and a pink mustache. And like that doesn't, like
really
what could possibly go wrong with that idea? But you guys had a secret, right? John had been to Zimbabwe.
Logan,
John.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't you.
Yeah.
But Logan had been to Zimbabwe, and in Zimbabwe they have this idea that, that's the way cars work, is that, people give each other rides. And then they appreciate it and it works, and everything is better. And you said, like, well, maybe we can transport that idea here. So you had a secret, which is you knew how it worked in Zimbabwe, and then the idea was to bring that to the U.S. and it would end up working like pretty well. So, but if you were a big company and somebody said, okay, we're going to do that, they would be like, that's idiotic. We have 8 ideas that work way better. And so that's when you lose the culture of innovation, when you only prioritize the good ideas.
Yep. Something you talk about is how your story is your strategy. I think it'd be helpful to hear, like, what do you mean by that? And what if you want to change your story?
Yeah, so let me, and I probably am overloading the terms a little. So one of the things that I think I said in the first book was, and it's something that you personally do very well, but most companies don't, which is they go, oh, well, the story, that's just like whatever, that's like a marketing thing. But it turns out that the story of the company, the long version, the 30-minute, an hour, 2-hour version of the story is the strategy. Like, so however you describe your company at length, that's the strategy. And so if you don't have a great story, you don't have a strategy that people in your company actually understand. And that's a huge mistake that CEOs make all the time. And culture and strategy go together for a lot of reasons. So, people go, well, what kind of culture should I have? And I'm like, I don't know. It depends what kind of company you have, right? Because your culture has to support your company. And just an example on this. So Amazon, which is, known for a kind of very great and pronounced culture, like one of their culture elements is frugality. And they go very, very far with this whole frugality thing. They used to give you a door, like with 2x4s, and that was your desk, just to let you know they were cheap. They're a strong signal. But their company strategy was to be the price leader in retail, so that if you went to Amazon, you wouldn't have to comparison shop. Like there were all these, in the early days, there were all these like comparison shopping engines and so forth, but Amazon just said, look, we're going to be cheapest. And so that went together. Now you go to Apple, like they don't have that cultural element. Their campus costs $5 billion. The doorknobs cost probably $2,000, whatever, I don't know what they cost. And so like they're high design. They want to build the most beautiful products in the world. And so that wouldn't be a smart cultural thing for them because that's not their story. And they're, they will always build more beautiful products than Amazon. And Amazon's products are not beautiful, but they'll never compete with Amazon on price. And so, depending on your strategy, you adopt a different culture. Now, stories can play a different role in culture, which, and the ancient samurai was great at this. So one of the things that's hard to do, so you have some cultural element. Let's say you have loyalty. And you want that in your culture, but like, how do you get people to understand the importance of it? And sometimes you can do that through a story. And so in the samurai, there's this legendary story of this guy, Lord Soma. And Lord Soma was known because he had the best genealogy of anybody. And so they didn't have like Louis Vuitton and, whatever, Tom Ford and all these things. So they, for status, they had like, how good was your family tree? That was the thing where you could really show off. And so everybody, like, this guy had the best genealogy, and he, went back for centuries and centuries. And then he had the samurai working for him who was like a very mediocre guy, like not clumsy, not very good at anything. But Lord Soma really liked him because he was very, very loyal. And so one day, Lord Soma's house starts burning down. It's engulfed in flames, just, there's no way that you can save this house. And his genealogy, they call it the Chikan Marikoshi, was in the house. And it's burning up with the house. And his samurai says, I'll go in and get it. And Lord Soma says, no, you're just going to die. I don't want to lose you and the scroll. Like, it's gone. Don't go in there. And the samurai says, nope. I know I've not been that great a samurai, but I'm going in and getting that scroll. And he goes into the house. And everybody is terribly sad because they know he's going to die. And the house burns to the ground. And they go in and look for him, look for the body. And sure enough, face down, all burned up, there he is. But they notice there's like a pool of blood around him. And they're like, wow, what's that? So they turn him over, and there's a cut down the middle of his stomach. And they open the cut, and they reach in, and there is the genealogy. He cut himself open, put the genealogy in there, and saved it from the fire. And it was known from then on as the blood genealogy. And that let everybody know you could be mediocre, but if you were loyal, you could be a legend. And so they got that into the culture in a big way. And of course, samurai are known for their loyalty. But those kinds of stories are very powerful. At Cisco, which was also a cheap culture in the early days under John Morgridge, he had this thing that he said, if you can't see your car from your hotel room, you're paying too much. And that's a story that everybody's going to repeat because it's so funny. Yeah. And then you're not staying at the Four Seasons, or like John Morgridge finds out about that, that's a problem.
One thing that I think we weigh sometimes is like cultural cohesion versus an individual employee and that employee's performance. How do you, when is one more important than the other?
Yeah, so I think almost always cultural cohesion is more important than a single employee. And I think this is one of the things we always, in Silicon Valley, and this, like we get very, very attracted to like IQ, horsepower, like how smart somebody is. But at the end of the day, I mean, how many people are working at Lyft now?
Over 5,000.
Yeah, so you need 5,000 people to work well and enjoy working there and so forth. And so that's, like the culture is what their work experience is like and what it's like to work with Lyft. And so there's no individual performance that's going to exceed that. Now, there is this kind of exception, and John Madden, the old coach of the Raiders and of Madden football fame, used to say, look, on a football team, there's one guy you can hold the bus for. Which meant, what he meant by that is everybody's got to be on time for the bus, but like there might be one player on the team that's so good that you'll actually hold the bus and not just leave and go to the game without him. And I think the best kind of articulation of this was from Phil Jackson when he was coaching the Bulls teams, where they had Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman. And Dennis Rodman it'd be very hard to get him to go to practice every day. And Phil Jackson made this rule that for Dennis Rodman, he doesn't have to practice every day. And a reporter said, well, does that mean Michael Jordan doesn't have to practice every day? He said, no, what are you, stupid? And the reporter goes, what do you mean? Dennis Rodman doesn't have to practice? He's like, yeah, Dennis Rodman. He's like, you can only have one Dennis Rodman on a team. In fact, you can only have one Dennis Rodman in society, or we'd have anarchy. Like, it's not. And so, yeah, if you have a super special talent and you can define them as outside the culture, like we're all behaving this way, there are no excuses. And if you can, like if you're like that special and weird, maybe, but you're not, so don't even ask. That's the kind of exception you can make on that.
What do you hope people take from the book?
Well, I mean, so the biggest thing is, culture is a very complex thing. There's so many things that affect it and drive it. Every decision you make, things that you say to one person that, another person hears third hand, all these kinds of things. And so, I go through a lot of the techniques on that, but the big thing is, like, can you see it? Can you see it moving as a leader? Do you understand what it is? Can you identify it? Can you see it when it shifts? And because people won't come to you and say, the culture is messed up in this way. They'll say, our culture is broken. It's messed up. And you'll be like, F off. Like, I have so many problems. Why are you telling me this? I mean, what am I going to do if my culture's broken? So it's kind of a set of tools to really help you see and move your own culture and get it to where it needs to go. And it's so important because, work is such a big part of like when you think about building a company, I'm own all, like I own all the lift stock that I have. So it's all of it. We haven't distributed anything. We believe in the company. We love you guys. So I want you to succeed. But the more important thing is, what was it like for everybody who worked there every day? Like, was that making their lives better or worse? And then that translates into all the customers and all the drivers and like what are their lives like because of the company. And that all is much more of a function of culture than anything else. And so it's so important and people just don't know how to do it. And so my hope is that the book helps people kind of get better at it. You never get perfect. It's even Toussaint screwed up a bunch of things that cost him a lot in the end, but it's you can certainly get better.
Nice. A lot of your writings, or almost all your writings, you start with quotes from hip hop.
That's right.
And it's said that you've said it's a hangover from your failed rap career. Can you share some more details?
Yeah. I know. So because I write about entrepreneurship, the story of hip hop is this like very impossible entrepreneurial story. Like the story of the whole art form is that in that, it started, it was literally like a thing they did at parties, in the Bronx. And not only, it was so like, it had so zero support. Nobody would play it on the radio. Nobody would sign the rappers. MTV, of course, didn't play the videos, but it was worse. Like the R&B guys hated rap music. Like nobody liked rap music. Nobody wanted it to go anywhere, and they would run out. Like it started with these things, the break beats, and they would run out of the records that had the break beats, or they'd get too popular in the Bronx. So there was guys who would make bootleg records like Breakbeats Volume 1 and Breakbeats Volume 2 and that kind of thing. And then this guy, Ralph McDaniels, created his own TV show and started putting rap videos on it. And it was all that entrepreneurial idea that, like, nobody's going to help us. We just have to figure it out. And it went from that to being, today it's the biggest musical art form in the world. And it's in, particularly the early, the first 20 years of it, like it's in the music, that entrepreneurial idea, like how do you go from nothing to something? And, what does it take and how do you deal with competition and how do you do all that? So it just ended up being something that was inspirational for my writing. And so I put the hip hop quotes in there to basically give them credit. And I license them, so they all get paid.
So I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to go to the audience questions. You're giving your proceeds of this book to anti-recidivism and to nonprofits working in Haiti. Tell us about what those issues mean to you.
Yeah, well, anti-recidivism, our prison system, just to kind of give you an idea of how bad it is on a global basis. So the recidivism rate in the U.S. prison system is over 70%. That means you get out of jail and you go back to jail over 70% of the time. And in other countries, it's like in the 30s. And you go, well, like, why is it so bad here? And it really has to do with every incentive in the prison system, and the culture of the prison system is designed to make you a lifelong criminal. And look, people, I'm not like we shouldn't prosecute crimes or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you have somebody like Shaka, and I've known him for years. His mother was bipolar. She was super abusive, beat him up, called him stupid all day long, and so forth. So he left home when he was 13 years old. And he literally grew up on the streets. He was, homeless for 2 weeks till the drug dealers adopted him. And then that's the culture he grew up in, which led him right to prison. And he was a criminal, like 100%. And, that was what it was. But that wasn't necessarily who he had to be. And he proved that by changing his culture while he was in prison. He's been out 10 years this year, and he's a best-selling author. He's a really important member of the community, and he helps so many people coming out of prison kind of stay out of prison. And so, I just think we need a much bigger emphasis on how people can change their culture coming out of that place and get back into society, because it's definitely possible. And then once you change, you change. You're not a criminal anymore. Like, what you do is who you are. And then with Haiti, what's happened, and it's a long story. I go through it in the book, but it's just tragic how really the birthplace of the person who probably did more or was more influential on ending slavery than any other single individual has kind of turned out to be such a kind of difficult place. But a lot of the people there, you can tell, have that have that spirit from the Haitian Revolution, and so at least we're gonna give it a try and see if we can improve things. Make Haiti great again. That's my thing.
All right, so first question.
It was absolutely great at one time.
First question from the audience. Can I restart the culture? I'm a founder and did wrong behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, this is actually one of the big reasons I start with the Haitian Revolution. Look, if a guy who's born a slave could change slave culture into military culture and defeat Napoleon, and to give you an idea, like a big problem with this trust thing is scale. Like, how do you scale an organization? To give you an idea how hard it is, the largest slave revolt in the history of the United States was 500 people. Haitian Revolution, at its peak, 500,000 people. That's how big a cultural shift he made. And so if you can change that, and he did, some of the techniques he used, officers in that slave army, some of them were from the Spanish army and the French army. So he had those guys in the army alongside. So he was able to do that integration, pick up those cultural elements, pick up those military techniques. So if you can do that, you can absolutely change it in a company. And quite frankly, everybody screws up their culture. There's no, I work with hundreds of companies, and not one of them has a perfect culture, not even John. There's breakage all over the place all the time. But you absolutely can change it, but it takes a real concerted effort.
All right, next question. If you had to choose a great idea or ethics or values, which do you choose?
A great idea or ethics or values.
Yes. And does your answer change if this is a choice at home or at work?
I don't even know how to think about values that are a great idea at home. I'm not sure, like I said, like a better barbecue recipe. Look, so I want to just kind of, I think it's important to clarify a few things. So one is you can have a really great culture, but if you're building that company off a mediocre idea, the company's still going to fail. Like a culture can't take an idea that's not going to work and make it work like that. You know, that is what it is, particularly if you're committed to that bad idea. So you just have to be realistic about that. And I think that, look, and as I said, values in a company context are very related to the strategy. And as I said, it doesn't matter if they're values, it only matters if they're virtues. So it doesn't matter if you believe them, it only matters if you do them. And so intent, you know, for me, doesn't mean much. It's only what you do. And yeah, if a company comes in with bad behavior, then that would override a lot of things for me, particularly if that behavior was driven from the top, or just like if the top couldn't deal with it. And so, you know, we've kind of talked about Uber as being okay. They really didn't even make a statement on that, and you know, regardless of what the intent was. Then you have Boeing, which is like another interesting example where, you know, I mean, you run a company, so you understand this. Like, there were 100% engineers that knew that the 737 wasn't safe. And so then you have to think about, well, what was it about the culture where they prioritized whatever they prioritized above safety at Boeing? And, you know, so those kinds of things, yeah, I wouldn't want to be associated with or invest in a culture that had those kinds of ideas. I think that's, you know, that's so far, that's gone so bad that you really have to question the leadership. Whereas a lot of times cultural problems, you know, no leader would have been able to anticipate some of the things that happen. And I think we have some cases like that in tech now where they're just hard to anticipate. Like, you know, you build a, you know, app to like share photos with your friends and family, and all of a sudden, like, you're getting blamed for election results. Like, that's a big jump. Like, it's hard to anticipate. And so I don't know that's, you know, that's a different kind of thing. That's something where, you know, he's got to now adjust to, like, it just got so much bigger and more powerful than anybody, like, nobody thought it was going to get that powerful. Like, if you read any article written about them up to, like, well, Obama got elected on Facebook in 2008, and everybody was like, hooray! Obama's a genius. This social networking is so awesome. And then Trump gets elected, and everybody's like, oh, fuck. Somebody shut that thing down. Turn it off, please. So, you know, like, it's harder to anticipate that's going to be a problem. And, you know.
You touched on this with Boeing potentially, but the next question is how do you change culture in a large established organization?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same way you set culture, to be honest with you, and how do you do it? You know, you buy my book. Wrote a whole book on that. But I will say this: it's hard to do. Difference in culture in a society and a culture in an organization is that in an organization, there's definitely top-heavy influence. So if you're an employee in an organization, you hate the culture, it will be very hard for you to change it without the help of, like, the CEO. So the CEO's got to commit to it, among other things. I mean, there's many, many kind of elements that I go through, but that is something that's, I would say, unique to companies. That's not true in, say, society, where you might change the culture with a meme or something like that.
Okay, next question. How do you judge from the outside if a company's culture is truly as great as the company claims it is?
It's very hard. Like, but it really has to do with, do the people at the working level believe that the culture is what they say it is? And look, there's actually a really interesting case where, so one of the best cultures in tech that everybody I think admires who's in technology is Amazon. They do like an amazing job at so many things. So they've got the little memo that you have to read before the meeting, so everybody has a prepared mind and that kind of thing. And they've got the bar raiser and just like so many things they did right. But then this article came out in the New York Times, right, which is like, oh, we interviewed like 55 people, and they're like all in tears, and they hate working at Amazon. The culture sucks. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that's just a hit job. But then I read the byline, and it's David Streitfeld, who's like, I know him, like, and he's like a really earnest reporter. So like, there's no way he made it up or like just found all the sour pusses in the company or whatever. And so, I was kind of digging around to try and understand like, how could those two things be true at the same time? And what turned out, and this is how subtle culture is, it is a great culture if you're a tech worker. Tech people love working at Amazon for the most part. Well, not everybody does, but like for the most part, like it's great. People work hard. They're really smart. They get amazing stuff done. They're really good at product definition, all these things. But if you came from like Macy's, and they got a lot of people from Macy's and Nordstrom's and all these places that they hired out of retail, like it's just like going to Mars, like it's like, what the fuck? Like you work until 9 o'clock at night? Like, I'm not going to do that. Like I can go into retail for that. Like, what are you talking about? And so, Amazon has, I think post the article has really recognized that they've got multiple cultures within the company that they've got to address, and it's got to work for everybody. And so that's something where like they have to, even the great Amazon has had to, make adjustments over time, which is, congratulations to them for making, but it just shows you how difficult these issues can be.
Next question is from Jason. What kind of culture or strategy do you think is best for fintech crypto companies? It's very specific.
That's very specific. Like it depends on your company, what you strike, like what do you want to accomplish? I mean, look, I'll say one thing that's really important for crypto companies is like trust and security. Basically trust in the code. So like your culture has to make sure it's like Boeing. Like crypto companies have to have not the way Boeing is, but the way Boeing should have been and the way Boeing had been for many years. Like Boeing's been a great company, but you can't prioritize anything over the safety of the code. And that's probably I think that's one common cultural element that if you're in that space, you have to deliver on. And a great example of that is a company I'm on the board of, Okta, who, Todd, who's the CEO, and really early on, and so Okta is like security, they hold your identity, and they log you into things. So like clearly trust is important in that thing. But look, when you're building a software company, there's all kinds of pressures. There's features, there's deals, there's this, there's that. But they were always committed to that idea and the culture that trust was important, and so important that they had a quarter and where it was like right before they were going to raise money, they needed a deal. I think it was with Sony or some company like Sony that they had to get the deal with to make the quarter to raise the money, like it was that kind of thing. And the rep had promised the customer, like, oh yeah, we're going to deliver this feature in this quarter, but they weren't going to deliver it for like 2 years. And it got to Todd to sign off on this thing, and he's like, no, we're going to whip the quarter, and if we can't raise the money, then that's what it's going to be. But like, we can't, if I let this go through, then everybody's going to know like I okayed the lie. And then once I do that, like everything like in the culture, I can't get back to that. And so he did that, and like, thankfully I like twisted David Wyden's arm at Khosla, and he was a very good soul and invested in the company in the B round. Like he led it with $7 million, like the B round. So like just to give you an idea how on a thread we were. But then you fast forward, and the big competitor was this company, OneLogin. And OneLogin was like coming out with features way faster than Okta, and like, they were always saying, oh, like, we're way better, and da-da-da-da, and the CRV guys who invested in it were always teasing me. But one day, OneLogin gets hacked, a breach. Okta's never been breached. They went 5 years without any downtime, not even for maintenance. Like, they're committed to that culturally, like, we're going to be there, we're not going to get breached. We may not have all the features, but like, that's the one thing you can count on us for. And that's when, like, your culture really defines your business. And I think in crypto, that is so fundamental. You can't be a crypto project successful without having that in the culture.
Next question from Susie. If your CEO doesn't understand that the culture is more than the core values listed on the wall, how would you help him understand the change needed? Quantitative evidence, anecdotal, etc.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I would definitely give the CEO my book, because another plug for it. But it's tricky because people hate to hear, because it really hurts, like, as a leader, it hurts. There's little that you can say to a leader that hurts their feelings more than saying, like, the culture is busted, and the reason it hurts their feelings is, one, it's a reflection on them, and two, they don't know what to do about it. So I think you have to help them with, like, what do you do about it, and then also just be, like, very, very, very clear about what it is. Like, here's the behavior we say we have, here's what we're actually doing. And so, how do we move from a value to a virtue and make this a real thing? But most leaders, I would say, in doing the book, it's funny because I talked to lots and lots of CEOs and people who were known for having, like, even the companies, the CEOs who were known for having, like, good cultures just didn't have a lot of techniques or tools. They didn't know a lot of these. And one of the kind of exciting things for me about writing the book, they were like, because I would go like, well, how do you do this? And they would go, well, I don't know how to do that. And I was like, well, this is how, like, the ancient samurai did it. And they would be like, wow. And so that's when I knew at least CEOs would like the book.
So we'll end on a light last question. Seriously. What is the best way to pitch my start? This is not me asking. Just a reminder. What is the best way to pitch my startup to you? John, how did you get Ben's time?
Look, I think, like, a big part of, so I'll just be very real here. A big part of being an entrepreneur is the ability to find a way. And that's actually, that was my favorite thing. So I went to go see these guys. I was like, I just want to know what's going on in the company before they asked me to be on the board, which I was excited to do. But the thing that they had that was so clear, even when things were at their darkest, was all they wanted to do was find a way. Like, we're going to find, wherever that door is, like, we're going to find it. Even if we have to look every hour, every minute to the last second we have on the clock, we're going to find it. And so if you want to, like, get to me to pitch, I know so many people in Silicon Valley, like, you just got to find one of them. And, like, have them, like, rep for you. That's the best way in. That's much better than, like, sending an email to business plans at 816T. I know it doesn't seem as fair, but, like, it is an entrepreneurial test, and that does work better. So I know people aren't going to like it that I said that, but I just have to be honest. Sorry. I always tell the truth, so I'm good in every hood spot. That's what Drake says.
All right, we're gonna close with that. I hope you enjoyed this evening's program, brought to you by the Commonwealth Club of Silicon Valley. Again, we'd like to thank Ben Horowitz, co-founder and general partner at Andreessen Horowitz.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.